show last year, and I invited him to tie some flies for us, and he said, wait a minute, you got to come up to Canada if you're going to tie some flies, and I'm going to show you how to fish them. So Phil, we're in your home country.
Well, thanks for inviting me along, Jack, and I hope to show you some of our techniques and some of the flies that are successful not only here in Canada but all over the world. Fishing around the island park area worked really well. Tie it on a number 14. And this is a 2X long nymph hook, 3906B in this case, but you could certainly use any other 2X hook.
You know how old that hook is? That goes back to the early 20s. That's one of the first steelhead hooks ever made. 3906B.
And now they've put all their laser points on it and improved it.
But I mean, you think about it, that's one of the most successful hooks ever. And we use it for, it's still the best hook for foam body flies. When you get it size 6 and 8. One of the things you don't want to do, folks, when you tie a foam body fly is tie it on a streamer hook. You've got your gate down so small that the fish, and this is something you're going to learn on Monday. You'll see how fish from underneath takes a hopper. It takes them sideways. We'll prove it to you. So if you have a long shank hook, what happens is you need the hook really as close to the middle of the fly as possible. So when you do set the hook, it goes through. So we have talked about that.
So I'm just going to change over here. I'm using an 8/0.
Sizes again, don't forget.
Yeah, this is a number 14. I tie them, up in Canada, our Calibaetis start at 12s. But 14s seem to be the size down in the island park area to start early in the hatch. Calibaetis are a multi-brooded mayfly, meaning they have multiple hatches throughout the season. So as that occurs, the next hatch will be a smaller size. Blue-winged olives are a perfect example. Your spring hatch is smaller, your fall hatch, your spring hatch is larger than your fall hatch because the fall hatch is the offspring of that spring hatch.
You know what blue-winged olives? I didn't know you stream fish or your lake fishermen knew anything about blue-winged olives.
Oh, I know about blue-winged olives.
By the way, I was on the
in
the Serengeti in a stream on there at Spring Creek full of Nile perch, and there were blue-winged olives hatching, and the Nile perch were taking them.
So I'm just covering this with tying thread. Now for the tail, I'm using these modeled turkey flats, another Stillwater product, but it's all modeled. You could use Cote de Leon. And since mayflies have 3 tails, and believe it or not, I'm actually going to try and get 3 fibers on here.
Do you think they count tails?
Oh, definitely. That's why it takes so long to take the fly, they lose count. So I just got, I like to put the 3 on there if I can. I think I've actually got 4, so I'm going to isolate one out. If I can. I put it, I will trim it out. So I want to tie in a tail that's about 1/2 to 3/4 of the shank. So I'm just going to hold it up, secure it in on top. And Calibaetis the tails are actually reasonably long. They interlock them. It's a Baetis family, same basic family as the blue-winged olives. It's a swimming mayfly, common to slow-moving stretches of rivers and obviously lakes. So this I'm just going to bring up. So now I'm going to go back down, and I'm right down to the base of the tail and flip under and put 1 wrap in, and that'll cock the tails up and fan them out. You can see I got a nice sort of 3-fibered tail there. Probably got 4 fibers in there, but again, the fish can't count, so we'll live with it and always trim one out later. Now we're going to put some wire in here. So I have a bit of the gold wire left over. So again, I'm going to hold that on the side. Secure that up. And then for the back on this, I'm going to use a turkey quill. Turkey's probably one of the most underrated fly tying materials because it comes naturally white, so it can be dyed and mottled. And you know, you can also use partridge, but that's not always easy to get. These mottled turkey flats, you know, they commonly use these turkey flats for wings on parachutes and thorax style flies, but they make great tail fibers and leg fibers too, which I'll show you. So I've just taken a slip from the quill that's maybe half the hook gape. I'm going to tie that in by the tip with the dull side of the feather, or the least prominently marked, facing up. Because this is going to be pulled over as a shell back and a wing case. So it's got to be long enough to go over the back of the fly and over the thorax region. Tie that in.
You spread out that turkey with something to hold it together?
Not really, because I'm gonna. When you see how I secure it down, it's going to be wired down. You can if you want. You can certainly put a fixative on it or a flexible cement, and that would work too. And then this is the Stillwater Solutions ostrich herl. It's a very fine fibered herl. We use it for gills on chironomids, and it makes great bodies on small scuds. For a smaller fly, I'm going to use up near the tip of the feather. So this is the tan Calibaetis color, and often the nymphs are a mixture of tan and olive. So if you take ostrich herl, I also make like European style nymphs with this stuff, big caddis larvae and pupa. They make great patterns for that too. So I'm going to take a single strand of the olive and a single strand of this Calibaetis color. So you get that sort of tan olive coloration. You could certainly tie them all one color if you wanted to. Just showing you a variation you can do. Because each lake, they're often slightly different. So I'm just going to put those two together and tie them in by the butts. The fiber width is pretty uniform, so tip or butt doesn't really matter. The butts are a secure tie-in. Tie those in place along the shank. Go forward to about the 3/4 point. And take one wrap around, make sure they're in there together, and then just wind them forward. One wrap right in front of the other. These help suggest the abdominal gills that Calibaetis have. You ever catch one in the palm of your hand and watch it, little gills along the side are just waving like mad. They're a really good indicator of water quality. If there's any pollutants in there, those gills foul up and it really affects the mayfly population. So that's why, you know, the original two-stroke outboards were such a bad thing on mayfly lakes. It's all that oil it puts in the water. So we got that in place. Now I'm just going to, rather than trim those on top, I'm going to pull the shell back over. So I'm just going to take I've moistened my thumb and forefinger. I don't want to trim those fibers off, so I just moisten, I just stroke the fibers down on the top, down the sides. And we're just going to take this, tie it off, a couple of wraps, and then we're going to come through with our ribbing material and just sort of zigzag or weave it through the ostrich fibers so we don't mat them down, and come all the way up like this. And again, I'm just securing this turkey quill down so I'm not too worried about being anatomically correct. You can throw a few wraps up front, adds a little bit of weight, tie it off, and again just twist and pull and break the wire away. Now, I am going to put a flashback on this, and sometimes I tie this fly with and without flashbacks. I will on this one. So I'm going to use the same, this is the Mirage, you could use Pearl. I'm just going to secure that. You can even tie your flashback along the entire thorax. So I tie them sometimes that way. Calibaetis, like chironomids, trap gases to give them buoyancy, to get up through the water column. It helps with their ascent. And it also helps when they split out of their case to sort of expel them out of their case when they can turn into the dun. So I'm just going to, so that gives the nymphs a bit of a flashy glow to them. And early in the emergence, there's this phenomenon known as false hatching. Whereas as the Calibaetis nymphs become more and more buoyant, they fight this buoyancy. So they get bobbed up above the weeds and then they scoot back down, and get bobbed up above the weeds, and they scoot back down. So the nymphs are rising and falling above the weed bottoms, although a foraging trout, lunch jumping up and down in front of you is a pretty good thing. So you can have some really excellent Calibaetis fishing, you know, a week or so prior to any really serious hatch, because they're targeting that. And on Monday night, the show we're doing, Ralph Cutter's DVD really shows that. So what I'm going to do now, I've got that tied in. I'm going to pull all this back, secure that excess turkey quill back over, because that's going to form a thorax, our wing case. Get that in place. Come forward right up to the hook eye. We're going to go back to our model turkey quill, and we're going to form legs out of this. So we're going to take 6 to 8 fibers, pull on them to, you pull perpendicular to the stem of any feather, it typically evens them up. So we're going to come in, trim them. I'm going to tie those in, sticking forward. These are going to become the legs. I'm going to fold them back. So on top of the shank, right behind the eye, tie them in. And if you want to make sure they're centered on top, you can just sort of grab them and give them a little bit of wiggle fore and after the tie-in point. I'll secure them in place. Trim off the excess. Now, I tie this fly sometimes, a number of variations. I'll make an ostrich hurl thorax, but I found down in the lakes we were fishing around, like Hebgen, and the peacock hurl thorax, for some reason, they really like that fly. And they had, none of the nymphs had any kind of dark thorax, but maybe, you know, it's the contrast under the water, the fact that my mayfly nymph sticks out amongst the naturals. You know, it's funny, you tease some of my friends who tie flies, they want to know exactly how many legs it's got. And, you know, you fool around with them, and showing them a cripple. When you're done, you trim off 2 legs, so it's crippled. I always think our goal is to not hide our flies amongst the 10 million naturals down there, or just to stand out a little bit so it gets eaten, right? So that's maybe what this does, the contrast. So we're just going to start, and just going to wind that peacock hurl forward, one turn in front of the other, right up to the tying point. Notice how I just bring the thread along, so when I'm finished, I know it's right there with me. So we're going to tie that in place. Now we're going to divide our legs. So I've turned the fly on the top so I can see, and I just kind of play with the legs a little bit, preen them, if you will, and spread them out. And I'm trying to divide them into 2 roughly equal clumps. So I've got these 2 on this side. So I'm just going to hold them and secure them back in place along the side of the thorax. And I actually pull on with a little bit of thread pressure so they'll stick out. Because the mayfly nymphs, when they move through the water, they undulate rapidly, 4 or 5 pulses of their abdomen, and then they'll rest in an arched position and then take off and rest like this. That's how they move. So when they pause, legs and tails are outstretched. So you'll move this fly with a hand twist retrieve, 4 or 5 turns, stop, a prolonged pause, let it sink, and then pick up the pace again. And quite often, just as that fly pauses and starts to sink is when things tighten up and it gets fun. So we're going to do the same on the near side. Hold those legs along. And we've got a nice set of divided legs on each side. And then we're just going to flip over the wing case. Tie that off with a couple of wraps. Trim away the excess. And then pull our mylar over.
Unfortunately, the tape ended right here. The fly is basically complete, just tying off the case, and then you can add either cement or epoxy over the case, and you have your Calibaetis.